The maid was fired, and the millionaire asked her a question. She said 3 words in Dutch and left him on his knees. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Berg mansion as Juana Reyes pushed her cleaning cart through the grand foyer. Her soft-soled shoes made no sound against the imported Italian stone, a skill she'd perfected over 3 years of being invisible in this house of cold luxury. She moved like a ghost through rooms that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Crystal chandeliers from Austria hung overhead, their faceted surfaces catching the light and throwing rainbows across walls adorned with paintings she recognized from art history books. Everything here screamed money, power, and the kind of untouchable wealth that made ordinary people feel small. But Juana wasn't ordinary people, and she wasn't really here to clean. At 32, she had the kind of understated beauty that people noticed only when they really looked, which, in this house, they never did. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her brown eyes kept downcast as she went about her work. To everyone here, especially to him, she was just another Mexican cleaning lady, invisible, forgettable, exactly what she needed to be. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 o'clock, and right on schedule, she heard the heavy footsteps descending the curved staircase. Luca van der Berg emerged into view, 55 years old, silver-haired, wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than her mother had made in 6 months of sewing. He strode past her without so much as a glance, barking orders into his phone in Dutch, something about shipping schedules and customs officials. Juana understood every word, but her face remained blank, focused on polishing the same spot on the marble table for the 3rd time. "Coffee now." He snapped his fingers at Maria, the elderly housekeeper who'd worked here for 15 years. "And make sure it's actually hot this time. I'm not paying you people to serve me lukewarm garbage, you people." The phrase hit Juana like a familiar slap. 3 years of hearing variations of it had taught her to swallow her anger, to let it fuel the slow burn of purpose that kept her going. Maria hurried toward the kitchen, her weathered hands shaking slightly. At 68, she shouldn't have to run for anyone. But jobs were scarce, and she had grandchildren to feed. Juana watched the interaction with the same expression she'd worn for 1,000 others just like it. Patient, blank, storing every cruelty away for later. Luca settled into his home office, a room Juana had come to know intimately. Mahogany desk imported from Brazil. Persian rugs worth more than most cars, and a wall safe hidden behind a painting of Dutch windmills. A nostalgic touch that might have been endearing if she didn't know what the safe contained. 20 minutes later, she knocked softly on the office door. "What?" His voice carried that particular brand of irritation reserved for interruptions from the help. "Excuse me, sir. Time to clean your office." He looked up from his computer screen, his pale blue eyes scanning her with the same attention he'd give a piece of furniture. "Make it quick. I have important calls to make." Important calls. She'd heard enough of them to know they weren't about legitimate business. Shipping manifests that didn't match cargo weights. Payments to officials who looked the other way. Bank transfers to accounts in countries that didn't ask questions. As she dusted around his desk, muscle memory took over. Every Wednesday for 3 years. The same routine. Polish the desk, empty the trash, clean the windows, and when he stepped out, which he always did around 9:15 to take his weekly call with someone named Hernandez, she had exactly 12 minutes to photograph whatever documents he'd left open. Today's prize was a spreadsheet showing discrepancies between declared cargo values and actual shipment contents. The numbers told a story that would make a prosecutor's day, if they ever saw it, but that wasn't her plan. Not yet. The call came right on schedule. Luca grabbed his phone and stepped onto the terrace, switching to rapid Spanish. Something about a delayed shipment from Colombia and unhappy clients who didn't like to wait. Juana's phone captured 6 photos before he returned, her movements practiced and silent. She'd learned to work around his patterns, to become part of the background noise of his perfectly ordered life. By noon, she was in the kitchen eating lunch with the other staff, Maria, Carlos the gardener, and Elena, who came twice a week to do laundry. They spoke in Spanish, sharing stories about their families, their struggles, their dreams for their children, normal people living normal lives, trying to make ends meet while working for a man who treated them like they were barely human. "He fired the pool guy yesterday," Elena whispered, glancing toward the office. "Caught him taking a 5-minute break and exploded. Called him lazy. Said he couldn't trust any of us to do our jobs properly. Manuel has 4 kids, Maria said sadly. What's he going to tell his wife? Juana listened, adding their conversation to the growing list of grievances she carried. Every casual cruelty, every thoughtless insult, every life disrupted by Luca's arrogance. She remembered it all. That evening, alone in her small apartment across town, she sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open. Photos from 3 years of careful documentation filled folder after folder, bank statements, shipping records, names and numbers that painted a clear picture of money laundering on an international scale. But tonight, like every night, her eyes drifted to the wooden box on her bookshelf. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed with age, lay a sealed envelope, her mother's handwriting across the front. Para Juana, open only when you find him and decide what to do with this pain I carry in my heart. Isabella Montemayor had died when Juana was 20, taking most of her secrets with her, but not all of them, not the most important one. I was 19 when I met your father, her mother had whispered from her hospital bed, her voice weak but determined. Younger than you are now. I thought he loved me. Maybe he did, in his way. But when it mattered, when I needed him most, he chose his money over his family. The rest of the story had come in pieces over the years. A young Mexican au pair working for a wealthy Dutch family in Amsterdam. A rebellious heir who swept her off her feet with promises and passion. 6 months of believing in fairy tales before reality came crashing down. He offered me money to make you disappear, Isabella had said, her eyes distant with old pain. As if you were a problem to be solved instead of a miracle to be cherished. I came home with nothing but my pride and you growing in my belly. Juana touched the envelope's edge, as she did every night. Soon, she promised silently. 3 years of preparation were almost complete. 3 years of being invisible, of swallowing insults, of watching him live in luxury built on the suffering of others. Tomorrow would be another day of cleaning his house, of listening to his casual cruelties, of gathering evidence. But the endgame was approaching. She could feel it in the way her pulse quickened when she looked at him, in the way her mother's voice seemed to whisper encouragement during the hardest moments. Luca van der Berg had spent 33 years believing his past was buried. He was about to learn that some sins have a way of coming home, carried in the hearts of the children who never forgot. Amsterdam, 1992. Isabella Montemayor stepped off the train at Amsterdam Central Station, with nothing but a worn duffel bag and an address scribbled on a piece of paper. At 19, she was all nervous energy and bright dreams, her dark eyes wide as she took in the foreign sights and sounds of a city that seemed like something from a fairy tale. The Hendrickson family had found her through an agency that specialized in placing Mexican au pairs with wealthy European families. Their letter, written in careful Spanish, had promised good wages, a private room, and the chance to learn Dutch while caring for their 8-year-old daughter, Sophie. What they hadn't mentioned was their neighbor's son. Luca van der Berg was 22, and everything Isabella had never encountered in her small hometown outside Mexico City. Tall and lean with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having to worry about money. He spoke 3 languages fluently and drove a red Porsche that made her heart race. Just looking at it, their first meeting happened on a Tuesday morning in September. Isabella was hanging laundry in the Hendricksons' backyard when a soccer ball came flying over the hedge, nearly taking her head off. "Dios mío," she gasped, ducking just in time. "Sorry, so sorry." The voice came with an accent she couldn't quite place. Dutch, but softened by something else. A moment later, a head appeared over the hedge. Sandy hair, blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. And that smile, Jesus, that smile could have powered half of Amsterdam. "I'm Luca," he said, vaulting over the hedge with athletic grace. "And you must be the new au pair Mrs. Hendrickson mentioned, Isabella, right?" She nodded, suddenly aware of how she must look, hair escaping from her ponytail, one of Mrs. Hendrickson's old aprons tied around her waist, clothespins still clutched in her hand. "Your Spanish is very good," she managed to say in Dutch, though her pronunciation was still shaky. His laugh was warm and genuine. "My Spanish is better than your Dutch, I think. Want to practice together sometime?" That sometime became every afternoon when Sophie was at school and the Hendricksons were at work. Luca would appear in their garden or knock on the kitchen door with some excuse, returning a borrowed book, asking for sugar, wondering if she'd seen his lost tennis ball. The excuses got progressively more ridiculous, but Isabella found herself looking forward to them. He was nothing like the boys back home, where they were all rough edges and machismo. Luca was thoughtful. He asked about her family, her dreams, her thoughts on everything from Dutch politics to Mexican literature. When she mentioned missing her mother's cooking, he showed up the next day with a bag of Mexican spices he'd tracked down at an international market clear across the city. "How did you even know what to buy?" she asked, laughing as she examined the chili peppers and cumin. "I may have called your mother," he admitted sheepishly. "Told her I was your friend and wanted to surprise you. She talked my ear off for 45 minutes about proper mole preparation. The fact that he'd gone to such trouble, that he'd thought to call her mother, a woman he'd never met in a country he'd never visited, made something warm and dangerous bloom in Isabella's chest. Their friendship deepened as autumn turned to winter. Amsterdam's gray skies and early darkness could have been depressing, but Luca showed her the city's hidden corners. Cozy cafes where they nursed coffee for hours while he helped her with Dutch grammar, museums where he explained the paintings in patient detail, switching between languages when she couldn't find the right words, ice skating on the frozen canals at Christmas, his steady hands keeping her upright while she laughed at her own clumsiness. "You're different here than at home," she observed one evening as they walked along the Herengracht, their breath visible in the cold air. "What do you mean? With your family, you're so formal, careful, but with me, you're just yourself." His jaw tightened slightly. "My family has certain expectations. Old money, old traditions. They have my entire life planned out. Which university, which career, which suitable Dutch girl I'll marry to produce suitable Dutch heirs. And what do you want?" He stopped walking and turned to face her, snow beginning to fall around them like something from a movie. "Right now, I want to kiss you." Their first kiss happened under a street lamp on the Prinsengracht, soft and tentative and tasting like the hot chocolate they'd shared at a nearby cafe. Isabella felt something fundamental shift inside her, like tectonic plates rearranging themselves to accommodate this new reality. They kept their relationship secret through the winter and into spring. Stolen moments in empty cafes, long walks through Vondel Park, evenings at his small apartment near the university where he was supposedly studying business, but mostly wrote poetry. He was too embarrassed to share with anyone but her. Isabella had never been happier. The Hendricksons were kind employers who treated her more like family than hired help. Sophie adored her and was picking up Spanish with the quick enthusiasm of childhood. And Luca made her feel like the heroine of one of the romance novels she'd devoured as a teenager. But fairy tales, she learned, were called fairy tales for a reason. The pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines on a rainy Thursday in May. Isabella stared at it in the tiny bathroom of her room, her hands shaking as the implications crashed over her like a wave. She told Luca that same evening in his apartment, watched his face go through a series of emotions. Shock, fear, something that might have been joy quickly replaced by panic. "Are you sure?" he asked, running his hands through his hair. "I've been sick every morning for 2 weeks, Luca. I'm sure." He was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the canal below. "What do you want to do?" "I want to keep our baby." The words came out stronger than she felt. "I know it's complicated, but we love each other. We can figure this out." That's when she saw it. The exact moment when the weight of his family's expectations crashed down on him. His shoulders sagged. And when he looked at her, she saw a stranger. "Isabella, you don't understand my family. They'll never accept this. They'll cut me off, destroy the business relationships I need to succeed. Everything I've worked for." "What about everything we've worked for?" Her voice broke on the last word. "What about us?" The fight that followed was devastating in its quiet intensity. No screaming, no thrown objects, just the slow, systematic destruction of everything she'd believed in. He offered money, lots of it, enough to take care of the problem, and set her up comfortably back in Mexico. "I'm not a problem to be solved," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "This baby isn't a mistake. We made her out of love. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "Of course it does. But be realistic. What kind of life could we have? My family would make sure I never worked in Europe again. We'd have nothing. We'd have each other. We'd have our daughter. But he'd already made his choice. She could see it in his eyes, in the way he'd started referring to their child as the situation, instead of their baby. Isabella left Amsterdam 3 days later, taking nothing but her original duffel bag and a heart that felt like it had been put through a shredder. The Hendricksons cried when she said goodbye, begging her to stay, to let them help. But she couldn't bear to remain in a city where every corner held memories of a love that had turned out to be built on quicksand. The flight back to Mexico was the longest 8 hours of her life. She pressed her hand to her still flat belly and whispered promises to the life growing inside her. Promises that they would be okay, that she would love her enough for 2 parents, that someday she would understand why her father had been too much of a coward to choose them. But some promises, Isabella would learn, were harder to keep than others. Mexico City, 2021. Juana stared at the laptop screen in her cramped apartment, her coffee growing cold as she scrolled through yet another article about Luca van der Berg's latest business expansion. The photograph showed him cutting a ribbon at the opening of his new import facility in Mexico City, surrounded by local politicians and business leaders, all smiles and handshakes. It had taken her 2 years to track him down after her mother's death, 2 years of following digital breadcrumbs, hiring a private investigator with money she'd saved from 3 different jobs, piecing together a puzzle that had led her from Amsterdam to New York to finally, incredibly, Mexico City. The irony wasn't lost on her. The man who'd abandoned her pregnant mother because she was just a Mexican had built his empire's latest chapter in Mexico itself, getting rich off the very people he'd once dismissed. Van der Berg Imports has become a cornerstone of Dutch-Mexican trade relations, the article gushed. The company's innovative approach to luxury goods importation has revolutionized the market, bringing European sophistication to discerning Mexican consumers. Innovative approach, Juana snorted. If only the journalist knew what she'd discovered about those shipping manifests. She'd spent months researching his business operations, following paper trails through public records, corporate filings, and news articles. What she'd found painted a picture of a man who'd traded his youthful cowardice for adult criminality. The legitimate import business was apparently just a front for something much darker. But first, she needed to get inside. She needed to see him up close, to understand the man her father had become. The plan had started as a fantasy born from grief and rage. Sitting beside her mother's hospital bed during those final weeks, listening to Isabella's labored breathing, Juana had imagined confronting the man who'd caused so much pain. In her darkest moments, she'd dreamed of revenge, of making him suffer the way her mother had suffered. But as the months passed, and her grief settled into something harder and more focused, the plan had evolved from fantasy into reality. Step 1. Change her identity. Legally, she was still Juana Montemayor, but a few carefully placed bribes and forged documents had created Juana Reyes, a woman with no connection to Isabella, no traceable link to Amsterdam, or a young Dutchman's mistakes. Step 2. Create a believable work history. This had been the trickiest part. She'd needed references that would check out, employment records that would satisfy even careful scrutiny. It had cost her nearly everything she'd saved, but the investment was worth it when she emerged with a solid paper trail, showing 3 years of housekeeping experience with wealthy families. Step 3. Get hired. This had required patience and a bit of luck. Van der Berg Imports used a staffing agency for their domestic help, a layer of separation that allowed Luca to maintain his distance from the help, while ensuring someone else dealt with the messy details of employment. Juana had applied to the agency on a Tuesday in March 2021, wearing her best interview outfit and carrying carefully forged letters of recommendation. The agency representative, a harried woman named Carmen who clearly processed dozens of applications daily, had barely looked up from her paperwork. Housekeeping experience? 3 years with the Rodriguez family in Polanco. Very wealthy, very demanding. Why did you leave? The family moved to Spain. They offered to take me with them. But my life is here. The lie came easily, practiced in the mirror dozens of times. Can you work with difficult employers? Juana had smiled sadly. I'm very patient. I understand that wealthy people have high standards. 2 weeks later, Carmen called with an offer. It's a live-out position with a Dutch businessman in Lomas de Chapultepec. The pay is excellent, but he's Particular, the last 3 girls quit within 6 months. Particular, Juana had almost laughed. If only Carmen knew how particular Luca van der Berg really was. Her first day at the mansion had been surreal. Standing in the marble foyer, looking up at crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than her mother had made in her entire life, Juana had felt like Alice falling down the rabbit hole. "You're the new cleaning girl." The voice had come from behind her, cold and dismissive. She'd turned to face him for the first time in her adult life. Luca van der Berg at 52 had been exactly what she'd expected, and nothing like she'd imagined. Tall, still handsome in that aristocratic European way, but with an hardness around his eyes that hadn't been there in the old photographs her mother had kept hidden in a shoebox. "Yes, sir, Juana Reyes." He'd looked her up and down with the same attention he might give a piece of furniture, checking for flaws or imperfections. "The agency says you have excellent references. I try to do good work, sir. See that you do. I don't tolerate laziness or carelessness. This house contains items worth more than you'll make in a lifetime. Break something, and it comes out of your pay." That first week had been a careful dance of observation and adaptation. She'd memorized his routines, cataloged his habits, noted which rooms he spent the most time in, and which he avoided entirely. The office had been her primary target from the beginning. That's where the real business got conducted, where the secrets were kept. It had taken 3 months to work up the courage for her first reconnaissance mission. 3 months of establishing herself as reliable, invisible, trustworthy. When she'd finally entered his office with her cleaning supplies, her hands had been shaking so badly she'd nearly dropped the spray bottle. But Luca had barely acknowledged her presence. To him, she was just another piece of background noise in his perfectly ordered world. The breakthrough had come 6 months in, during one of his weekly calls with someone named Hernandez. She'd been dusting the bookshelves when she overheard enough Spanish to understand they were discussing shipping schedules that didn't match official manifests, cargo that weighed more than what was declared, payments to customs officials who asked fewer questions. That night, she'd lain awake staring at the ceiling, pieces of a much larger puzzle clicking into place. Her father wasn't just a heartless businessman, he was a criminal. From that point forward, every cleaning session became an intelligence-gathering operation. She'd invested in a small camera disguised as a pen, practically invisible when tucked among her cleaning supplies. Document after document had joined her growing collection of evidence, bank statements showing transfers to accounts in known money laundering havens, shipping records with discrepancies that screamed of smuggling operations, communications with people whose names appeared on watch lists for drug trafficking. The scope of it had been breathtaking. Luca van der Berg hadn't just built an import business. He'd created a sophisticated money laundering operation that helped Mexican cartels clean their profits through European luxury goods. But the evidence alone hadn't been enough. Juana had wanted more than just to see him arrested. She'd wanted him to know who she was, to understand the consequences of his choices, to feel the weight of 33 years of abandoned responsibility. The plan for the final confrontation had crystallized around the diamond necklace. She'd first seen it in his safe during one of her careful explorations. A stunning piece worth hundreds of thousands of dollars that had belonged to his late wife. The insurance documents in his files told the story. Purchased with money that had been washed so clean, it sparkled almost as brightly as the diamonds themselves. Taking the necklace would force the confrontation she'd been building toward for 3 years. He would suspect her first. The newest employee, the obvious target. She would let him accuse her, humiliate her, reveal the full extent of his prejudice and cruelty. And then, when he thought he had won, when he had reduced her to nothing in front of everyone who worked for him, she would destroy his world with 3 words in his native language. The beauty of it was its simplicity. No elaborate schemes, no complex plots, just the truth, delivered at the moment when it would have maximum impact. As Juana closed her laptop and prepared for another day of invisible servitude, she touched the sealed envelope on her bookshelf one more time. Soon, she promised her mother silently, soon, Luca van der Berg would learn that some debts could never be paid off. Only collected, the morning of the theft dawned gray and humid, with the kind of oppressive heat that made Mexico City feel like it was holding its breath. Juana arrived at the mansion at 7 sharp, as she had every weekday for 3 years. But today felt different. Today, the careful performance she'd been maintaining would finally reach its climax. She moved through her usual routine with practiced precision, collecting her cleaning supplies from the utility closet, checking the daily schedule Maria had left on the kitchen counter, mentally rehearsing the timing that would make everything possible. The diamond necklace waited in Luca's safe, and she knew exactly how to get to it. Over the past 6 months, she'd memorized every detail of his security system. The cameras had blind spots, corners where the angles didn't quite meet, doorways where a person could slip through undetected if they knew exactly where to step. More importantly, she'd learned Luca's patterns with the obsessive attention of someone whose life depended on it. Every Tuesday at 10:30 a.m., he took a conference call with his Amsterdam partners. The call lasted exactly 45 minutes, and he always took it in his bedroom on the second floor, pacing by the windows as he conducted business in rapid Dutch. During that time, his office remained empty, the safe unguarded. Juana had discovered the safe's combination through weeks of careful observation. She'd noticed how Luca's fingers moved across the keypad when he thought no one was watching, had memorized the rhythm and sequence from across the room. The combination was pathetically predictable for a man of his supposed sophistication. His birth year, followed by what she'd eventually realized were the last 4 digits of his Dutch passport number at 10:25. She heard his footsteps on the stairs. Followed by the familiar sound of his bedroom door closing, the conference call would begin momentarily. Conducted in Dutch with men who'd known him since childhood, discussing quarterly profits and expansion plans as if they were talking about the weather. Juana slipped into the office, her heart hammering against her ribs despite months of preparation. The safe was hidden behind a reproduction of Vermeer's Girl with a Pearl Earring, another pathetically obvious choice for a man who clearly thought himself clever. Her fingers moved across the keypad with steady precision. 196-97328. The lock disengaged with a soft click that sounded deafeningly loud in the quiet room. Inside, organized with typical Dutch precision, were documents, cash, and jewelry. The diamond necklace lay in a velvet-lined box at the back. 3 strands of perfectly matched stones that caught the light like captured stars, according to the insurance document she'd photographed months ago. It was worth $300,000 and had been purchased the year after Luca's wife died, ostensibly as an investment piece. But Juana knew better. The timing of the purchase coincided with a particularly large payment from one of his cartel contacts. Blood money, transformed into something beautiful and pure, the perfect metaphor for everything Luca van der Berg represented. She lifted the necklace from its box. Surprised by its weight, the diamonds were flawless, each stone perfectly cut and set. For a moment, she imagined the women who might have worn something like this. Socialites at charity galas, wives of politicians, daughters of old money families who'd never questioned where their luxury came from. But there was no time for reflection. She had exactly 12 minutes before Luca's call would end. 12 minutes to plant the evidence that would trigger the confrontation she'd been building toward for 3 years. She slipped the necklace into her cleaning supply caddy, nestling it beneath a stack of microfiber cloths where it would be easily found but not immediately obvious. The placement had to be perfect, suspicious enough to warrant a search, but not so obvious as to seem planted. The safe closed with another soft click, the painting sliding back into place as if nothing had happened. Juana was back in the hallway, resuming her normal cleaning routine, when she heard Luca's voice rising from upstairs. Switching from Dutch to English as he concluded his business. "Perfect," he was saying, his tone satisfied. "The shipment from Rotterdam should clear customs by Friday. Make sure our friends at the port understand the importance of discretion." 3 minutes later, he was back downstairs, striding into his office with the casual arrogance she'd grown to despise. She continued dusting the hallway table, every nerve-ending alert as she waited for the discovery. It took longer than she'd expected. For nearly an hour, Luca worked at his computer, taking calls and reviewing documents, while Juana cleaned her way through the mansion's public rooms. She began to worry that he might not check the safe until evening, which would complicate her timing. But at 12:15, she heard the sharp intake of breath that told her the moment had arrived. "Son of a bitch," he muttered in English, then immediately switched to Dutch, his voice rising with each word. She didn't need to understand the specific phrases to recognize the tone. Fury, disbelief, and something that might have been panic. Within minutes, he was on the phone with building security, his voice tight with controlled rage. "I want everyone here now. No one leaves until we find it. No one. The next hour unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Security guards arrived, along with the manager of the staffing agency and a representative from Luca's insurance company. The mansion filled with tense energy as every employee was questioned, their backgrounds checked, their belongings searched. Juana waited with the others in the kitchen, her face a mask of confused concern, while her heart raced with anticipation. Maria sat beside her, wringing her hands and whispering prayers under her breath. Carlos, the gardener, kept protesting his innocence to anyone who would listen. Elena, the part-time laundry woman, had started crying the moment the security guards appeared. "I've worked here for 15 years, Maria said, her voice shaking. "I've never taken so much as a peso that wasn't mine. How can he think?" "He doesn't think any of us are capable of honesty," Carlos interrupted bitterly. "To him, we're all potential criminals just because we're Mexican." Juana said nothing, but she filed the comment away. Carlos understood exactly who Luca van der Berg really was. The search began with the newest employee. Juana herself, 2 security guards escorted her to an empty room, while a third went through her cleaning supplies with methodical thoroughness. She watched with perfectly crafted anxiety as they examined each item, moving closer to the cache of microfiber cloths where the necklace waited. "What's this?" The guard's voice was sharp, as his fingers found the unexpected weight among the cleaning cloths. Juana's eyes widened with what she hoped looked like genuine shock, as the diamond necklace emerged, sparkling obscenely in the fluorescent light. "I don't know. I've never seen that before in my life." But the performance was for the security guards, not for herself. Inside, she felt a fierce satisfaction as the trap she'd spent 3 years preparing finally snapped shut. Within minutes, she was being escorted back to the main room where Luca waited, his face a mask of cold fury. The necklace lay on the mahogany table between them like an accusation, every facet catching the light. "Care to explain how this ended up in your cleaning supplies?" His voice was dangerously quiet, the kind of calm that preceded explosions. "I don't know, sir. I swear I've never seen it before. Someone must have what? Planted a $300,000 necklace in your cart. Do you think I'm stupid?" The word hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, the other employees watched with a mixture of fear and fascination. This was the moment Juana had been building toward, the point where Luca's true nature would finally be revealed in front of witnesses. She took a deep breath, let her voice break with what sounded like desperation. "Please, sir, I would never steal from you. I need this job. I have family to support." "Family to support," he repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "Let me guess. A dozen relatives all expecting you to send money home because you work for the rich gringo." "Right. That's how you people think, isn't it? You people." There it was. The casual racism that had poisoned every interaction for 3 years, finally spoken aloud for everyone to hear. The stage was set. The players were in position, and Juana Reyes was about to become someone else entirely. The atmosphere in the room shifted like air pressure before a storm. Luca's words, "You people," landed with the force of a physical blow, and Juana watched as every face around her registered the naked prejudice behind them. Maria's eyes widened in shock. Carlos's jaw tightened with barely contained anger. Even the security guards looked uncomfortable, suddenly finding the floor very interesting. But Luca was just getting started. 3 years, he continued, his voice rising with each word. 3 years I've let you into my home, trusted you with my belongings, paid you more than you could make anywhere else. And this is how you repay me, by stealing from me like some common criminal. Juana forced tears into her eyes, let her voice shake with practiced vulnerability. "Sir, please, I swear on my mother's grave, I didn't take anything, I don't know how." "Your mother's grave," Luca laughed, a sound as cold as winter rain. "Let me tell you something about your people and your mothers. You use them as excuses for everything. Don't you poor me. I have to support my family. Poor me. My mother is sick. Poor me. I need money, so I'll just take what isn't mine." The room had gone dead silent except for the sound of Elena's quiet sobbing. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance as if the sky itself was responding to the ugly scene unfolding in the mansion's elegant sitting room. "You want to know what I think happened here?" Luca moved closer to Juana, towering over her with deliberate intimidation. "I think you've been planning this for months, watching my routines, figuring out when the safe would be unguarded, probably casing the whole house for whatever else you could grab. No. Sir, I would never— Don't interrupt me. His voice cracked like a whip. You people are all the same. Give you an inch and you take a mile. Let you into civilized society and you show your true nature the first chance you get. You people. Again. Each repetition felt like another nail in the coffin of any remaining doubt about who Luca van der Berg really was. Juana memorized every word, every sneer, every casual cruelty that confirmed everything she'd believed about the man who'd abandoned her mother. Strip search her, Luca ordered the security guards. Check every pocket, every seam. I want to know what else she's stolen. The humiliation of the search was calculated and deliberate. They made her empty her pockets, remove her shoes, submit to hands running over her clothing, while Luca watched with the cold satisfaction of a man who believed he was teaching a lesson about the natural order of things. They found nothing. Of course, the diamond necklace had been the only planted evidence, carefully placed to trigger exactly this moment. But Luca's fury only seemed to intensify with each empty pocket, each fruitless search. Where's the rest of it? He demanded. What else have you taken over the past 3 years? Cash from my desk, small items you thought I wouldn't miss. Nothing, Juana whispered, playing her part perfectly. I've never taken anything that wasn't mine. Liar. The word came out like a curse. You're all liars and thieves. It's in your blood, isn't it? This is what happens when we try to help people like you. This is the gratitude we get. Outside, the first fat raindrops began to hit the windows, and the sky darkened with the promise of a serious storm. The weather seemed to be conspiring with the drama unfolding inside, adding atmosphere to what Juana had always imagined as the climactic scene of her 3-year performance. Call the police, Luca told one of the security guards. I want her arrested for theft. Make sure they know she had access to the entire house, that there might be other items missing. We haven't discovered yet. Sir, Maria ventured hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. Perhaps there's been a mistake. Juana is a good girl. A good girl. Luca turned his fury on the elderly housekeeper. Is that what you call someone who steals from the people who employ her? Maybe I need to reconsider all of my staff if this is the kind of character reference you give to criminals. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Maria had grandchildren to feed, a mortgage to pay. At 68, she couldn't afford to lose this job, and everyone in the room knew it. The casual way Luca wielded his power, threatening innocent people to make a point, was perhaps the most revealing moment yet. But Juana barely heard the exchange. Her attention was focused on the growing storm outside. On the way, the light in the room was changing as dark clouds gathered overhead. The timing was almost too perfect, as if the universe itself was providing the dramatic backdrop she needed for what came next. You know what the real problem is, Luca continued, his voice taking on the tone of a man delivering a lecture. We've been too soft, too generous. We hire people like you out of some misguided sense of charity. And this is what we get in return. Theft, ingratitude, excuses. He moved to the window, looking out at the darkening sky with his hands clasped behind his back, like some kind of colonial overlord surveying his domain. In the old days, employers knew how to handle situations like this. There were consequences. Real consequences that made people think twice before biting the hand that fed them. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming against the glass with increasing intensity. Lightning flickered in the distance, and the rumble of thunder was getting closer. But we live in soft times, Luca said, turning back to face the room. So, instead of the beating you deserve, you'll get a police record and a reputation that ensures you never work in a decent household again. That was when Juana made her move. She rose slowly from her chair, her movements deliberate and controlled despite the tears on her cheeks. Every eye in the room was on her as she faced the man who'd spent the last hour systematically destroying her dignity. You want to know the truth, she said, her voice stronger than it had been all afternoon. I think we've heard enough of your lies, Luca replied dismissively. The truth, Juana continued, taking a step closer to him, is that you're right about one thing. This has been planned for a long time, 3 years in fact. Something in her tone made him pause. The other people in the room seemed to sense a shift in the atmosphere, the way animals can sense an approaching earthquake. What are you talking about? 3 years of watching you. 3 years of listening to your casual cruelties, your racist comments, your complete lack of respect for the people who make your comfortable life possible. You're confessing. Luca's eyes lit up with vindictive satisfaction. Finally, some honesty from 3 years of gathering evidence about your money laundering operation, Juana interrupted, her voice cutting through his like a blade, about your connections to the cartels, your bribes to customs officials, your very impressive system for washing blood money through luxury imports. The room went dead silent, except for the sound of rain against the windows and the distant rumble of thunder. Luca's face had gone pale, his confident smirk replaced by something that looked like the first stirrings of panic. "You're insane," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're making things up, trying to..." "Am I?" Juana reached into her bra and pulled out a small USB drive. "Because I have photographs, bank records, shipping manifests, communications with very interesting people in very interesting places." She held up the drive, letting him see it clearly. 3 years of evidence, Luca. More than enough to put you away for the rest of your life. The storm outside was reaching its peak, lightning illuminating the room in stark flashes while thunder shook the windows. But the real storm was just beginning. "Who are you?" Luca whispered, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked genuinely afraid. Juana smiled, and it wasn't the submissive expression of a frightened cleaning lady anymore. It was something much more dangerous. "That's the right question," she said. "But I think we should continue this conversation outside, don't you? In the rain, where it's more appropriate." The rain had turned from a steady downpour to a torrential deluge by the time Juana stepped through the mansion's front doors, Luca following behind her with the stunned expression of a man whose world had just shifted on its axis. The security guards and staff remained inside, watching through the windows as two figures faced each other in the storm like characters from a Greek tragedy. Lightning split the sky overhead, illuminating the circular driveway where Luca's expensive cars sat gleaming in the rain. Water ran down Juana's face, plastering her dark hair to her skull, but she seemed oblivious to the downpour. Every fiber of her being was focused on this moment, the confrontation she'd dreamed about for 3 years. "You want to know who I am?" she called out over the sound of rain hammering against stone and metal. "You want to understand why someone would spend 3 years of their life documenting your crimes?" Luca stood 20 feet away, his tailored suit already soaked through, his silver hair darkened by rain. The arrogant confidence that usually armor-plated his personality had cracked, leaving something raw and uncertain underneath. "You're blackmailing me," he said, but his voice lacked its usual authority. "Whatever you think you know." "I know everything, Luca." The use of his first name made him flinch. For 3 years, she'd called him Sir, with perfect subservience. Now his name in her mouth sounded like an accusation. "I know about the shipments from Rotterdam that weigh more than their manifests claim. I know about your monthly payments to customs official Miguel Hernandez. I know about the accounts in the Cayman Islands where cartel money goes to get washed clean." Each revelation hit him like a physical blow. Juana could see his mind racing, trying to calculate how much she really knew, how much damage she could do, but she wasn't finished. "I know about the diamond necklace," she continued, her voice rising above the storm. "The one I planted in my own cleaning supplies. The one you bought with blood money the same month you received a particularly large payment from your friends in Sinaloa. You planted it." The words came out as a whisper, barely audible over the rain. "Every detail of this afternoon was choreographed, Luca. Your racist tirade, the humiliation, the threats against Maria. All of it was designed to reveal exactly who you are, and you performed beautifully." Thunder crashed overhead, and in the brief flash of lightning that followed, Luca's face looked ghostly pale. "What do you want, money? I can pay you more than..." "Money," Juana laughed, a sound that was equal parts bitter and triumphant. "You think this is about money? You think I spent 3 years of my life infiltrating your house, documenting your crimes, gathering enough evidence to destroy you? All for money? Then what?" He was shouting now, his composure finally cracking completely. "What do you want from me?" The question hung in the air between them, carried by wind and rain and 33 years of accumulated pain. This was the moment Juana had been building toward, the revelation that would transform everything. She took a step closer to him, close enough that she could see the fear in his pale blue eyes that she'd inherited, though he'd never noticed the resemblance. "I want you to remember a girl named Isabella Montemayor," she said, her voice dropping to a tone that somehow carried despite the storm. 19 years old, working as an au pair in Amsterdam, beautiful, trusting, stupid enough to believe that a wealthy Dutch boy actually loved her. Luca went completely still. Even the rain seemed to pause as the name hit him with the force of a sledgehammer. "Isabella," he breathed, and 33 years of buried guilt came flooding back in an instant. "You remember her now, don't you?" Juana moved closer still, until they were almost face to face. "The Mexican girl who got pregnant and ruined your perfect life. The one you paid to disappear so you wouldn't have to deal with the inconvenience of a bastard child." "No," Luca said, but it sounded more like a prayer than a denial. "No, that's not what? Not how it happened. Not how you abandoned a 19-year-old girl who was carrying your child because your family's money was more important than love." The storm raged around them, but Juana felt like she was standing in the eye of a hurricane, a place of perfect calm, where truth finally had room to breathe. "She came back to Mexico," Juana continued, her voice steady despite the tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. "Alone, pregnant, heartbroken. She worked 3 jobs to support us. Never married because she never got over you. Never told me who my father was because she was protecting me from the pain of knowing I wasn't wanted. Us." The word came out strangled. "She died 3 years ago, Luca. Cancer. But before she died, she gave me a letter with your name, with the truth about what happened in Amsterdam, with everything I needed to find the man who destroyed her life." Lightning illuminated them both in stark black and white, and in that moment of perfect clarity, Luca finally saw what he should have noticed years ago: the shape of her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she held herself when she was angry, chin lifted in defiance. "Dios mío," he whispered in Spanish, his mother tongue abandoning him for the language of the woman he'd wronged. "I'm Isabella's daughter," Juana said, switching to Dutch with perfect pronunciation. "I'm the child you paid her to abort. I'm the inconvenience you tried to make disappear with money." But she wasn't finished. The final revelation, the one that would complete her 3-year plan of psychological warfare, was still to come. "But most importantly," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 33 years of abandonment, "I'm someone you've been living with for 3 years without recognizing. I'm someone whose existence you've denied for my entire life. I'm someone who learned to speak your language just so I could tell you the truth in words you'd understand." She took one final step closer, close enough that he could see his own eyes reflected in her face, close enough that there could be no doubt, no denial, no escape from the truth that was about to destroy him. "Omdat ik je dochter ben," she said in perfect Dutch, each word enunciated with devastating clarity. "Because I am your daughter." The words hit Luca like a physical blow. His legs gave out, and he collapsed to his knees in the muddy driveway, rain streaming down his face as the full weight of what she'd said crashed over him. His daughter, the child he'd convinced himself didn't exist, had never existed, had been taken care of by money and distance and time. She was here, had been here for 3 years, had been watching him, judging him, gathering evidence against him while he treated her like she was nothing. "Isabella," he gasped, and for a moment, Juana could see the young man her mother had fallen in love with, vulnerable, broken, capable of genuine emotion. "Isabella is dead," Juana said, her voice cutting through his shock like a blade. "But her daughter is very much alive, and unlike her mother, I'm not 19, I'm not naive, and I'm not going anywhere until I get what I came for." Above them, the storm began to subside slightly, as if even nature was exhausted by the intensity of what had just been revealed. But the real reckoning was only beginning. Luca remained on his knees in the rain, his expensive suit ruined, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. The revelation that Juana was his daughter had hit him with such force that he seemed physically unable to process it, his mind reeling between denial and devastating recognition. "Get up," Juana said, her voice cutting through the diminishing storm. "We're not finished." But Luca couldn't move. 33 years of suppressed guilt had crashed over him all at once, and he was drowning in memories he'd spent decades trying to forget. Isabella's face the last time he'd seen her. Young, beautiful, and utterly destroyed by his betrayal. The way she'd looked at him when he'd offered her money to take care of the problem. The sound of her crying as she'd walked away from his apartment, carrying his child, and all the shattered pieces of what they'd once shared. "I loved her," he whispered, the words barely audible over the rain. "I did love her. Not enough." Juana's response was swift and merciless. "Not enough to choose her over your family's money. Not enough to stand up to your parents. Not enough to be a man instead of a coward." The words cut deep because they were true. Luca had been 22, old enough to make his own choices but too weak to defy the expectations that had been drilled into him since birth. His parents had made it clear, marry Isabella, and he'd be cut off from the family fortune, disowned, left to make his own way in the world with a Mexican wife and a bastard child. At 22, that had seemed like an impossible burden. Now, at 55, he realized it would have been the only choice worth making. "She never told you about me?" he asked, looking up at Juana with eyes that mirrored her own. "She told me my father was dead," Juana replied coldly. In a way, she wasn't lying. The man she loved in Amsterdam died the day he chose money over family. What's left is just a shell filled with greed and casual cruelty. The sound of sirens in the distance made them both look up. Police cars were approaching, their red and blue lights cutting through the gray afternoon like emergency beacons. "You called them," Luca said, and it wasn't a question. "Before I took the necklace, they should be here any minute to arrest you for theft." Which is ironic, considering you're the one who's been stealing from Mexico for years. But as the police cars pulled into the circular driveway, Juana reached into her jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, yellowed with age and sealed with wax that had cracked over the years. "Before they take you away," she said, "there's something you need to see, something my mother wanted you to have, if I ever found you." Luca's hand shook as he took the envelope, recognizing Isabella's handwriting immediately. His name was written across the front in the same careful script he remembered from love notes she used to leave in his textbooks. "She wrote this when she found out she was dying," Juana explained, her voice softening for the first time since the confrontation began. "She made me promise not to open it. Not to read it until after I decided what to do with you." The police officers were getting out of their cars now, but they seemed hesitant to interrupt the scene playing out in the rain. One of them, a middle-aged detective with kind eyes, approached slowly, clearly sensing that something more complicated than a simple theft was taking place. "Señorita Reyes," he called out, "we received your call about the stolen necklace." "Detective Morales," Juana acknowledged without taking her eyes off Luca. "This is the thief, but before you arrest him, he needs to read something." Luca's fingers fumbled with the envelope's seal, his hands shaking from cold and shock and 33 years of buried emotion. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered with Isabella's familiar handwriting. The letter was dated just 2 weeks before her death. "My dearest Luca," it began, and his vision blurred with tears that had nothing to do with the rain. "If you are reading this, it means our daughter found you. I hope that doesn't frighten you too much. Though I suspect Juana has already given you quite a shock. She is so much like you in some ways. Intelligent, stubborn, unable to let go of things that matter to her." Luca's breath caught in his throat. Even facing death, Isabella had found kindness for him, had seen similarities between him and the daughter he'd never known. "I want you to know that I never hated you for what happened in Amsterdam. I was angry for many years, heartbroken for even longer, but I never hated you. You were young, scared, pressured by people who didn't understand what we had. I've forgiven you for that." The detective and his officers watched in fascination as the man they'd come to arrest broke down completely, his shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul. "But I also want you to know what your choice cost us. I worked 3 jobs to support Juana, sometimes sleeping only 4 hours a night. I never married because I never stopped loving the boy you used to be, even though I knew he was gone. I died at 52 from cancer that might have been treatable if I'd had better health care. The kind of health care your money could have provided." Juana watched her father's face as he read, seeing the progressive destruction of every defense he'd built over the decades. This was what she'd wanted, not just his arrest, but his complete understanding of the consequences of his abandonment. Juana grew up without a father, but she grew up strong, stronger than me, Stronger than you, probably stronger than she needed to be. She put herself through school, learned 4 languages, and became the kind of woman who doesn't accept injustice quietly. If she's confronting you now, it's because she believes you need to answer for more than just abandoning us. The detective cleared his throat gently. Sir, we need to... Wait, Juana said sharply. Let him finish. Luca's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the paper, but he forced himself to keep reading. I'm dying now, and I find myself thinking about forgiveness, not for your sake, but for mine, and for Juana's. Anger is a poison that hurts the person carrying it more than the person who caused it. I don't want our daughter to carry that poison for the rest of her life. So this is what I want you to know. If you are reading this, it means you have a chance to make different choices, not to undo the past. That's impossible. But to create a different future. Juana may hate you now, and she has every right to, but she is also capable of forgiveness, if you prove yourself worthy of it. The question is, what kind of man will you choose to be now that you know the truth? Will you be the coward who abandoned his pregnant girlfriend? Or will you be the father our daughter deserved to have all along? The letter was signed simply, "With love and hope for redemption, Isabella." Luca folded the letter carefully, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he were handling something infinitely precious and fragile. When he looked up at Juana, his face was transformed, not by the expensive suits or perfectly styled hair that marked him as successful, but by raw, honest emotion. She was better than both of us deserve, he said quietly. Yes, Juana agreed. She was. Detective Morales stepped forward again, clearly uncomfortable with interrupting, but obligated by duty. I'm sorry, but we really need to proceed with the arrest. Juana looked at the police officers, then at her father kneeling in the mud, then at the envelope that contained 3 years' worth of evidence that could destroy him completely. The choice her mother had written about, between poison and forgiveness, between justice and revenge, lay before her like a crossroads. Everything she'd planned for 3 years had led to this moment, and now she had to decide what kind of person she wanted to be. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming under weak afternoon sunlight that filtered through the breaking clouds. Juana stood in the circular driveway, holding the USB drive that contained 3 years of evidence, while Detective Morales waited patiently for her to make the choice that would determine her father's fate. Luca remained on his knees, Isabella's letter clutched in his hands like a lifeline. The transformation in his face was complete. Gone was the arrogant businessman who'd spent the morning humiliating his employees, replaced by a broken man confronting the full weight of his failures. Detective, Juana said finally, her voice steady despite the enormity of the decision she was about to make. I need to withdraw my complaint about the theft. Ma'am, Detective Morales looked confused. You called us about a stolen necklace. I lied. The admission came out clear and strong. I planted the necklace in my own cleaning supplies to force a confrontation with my employer. There was no theft. The detective's eyebrows rose, but he'd been in law enforcement long enough to recognize when a situation was more complicated than it appeared. Are you sure about this? Filing a false report is a serious matter? I'm sure. Juana looked down at her father, who was staring at her with an expression of stunned disbelief. But there are other crimes we need to discuss, much more serious ones. She held up the USB drive, and Luca's face went pale again, as he realized what she was about to do. This contains evidence of money laundering, bribery of government officials, and conspiracy to aid drug trafficking operations, she continued, her voice taking on the professional tone of someone who'd done her homework thoroughly. 3 years' worth of documentation that proves Berg Imports is a front for washing cartel money through luxury goods. Detective Morales' demeanor shifted immediately. This wasn't a domestic dispute anymore. This was major criminal activity that fell squarely within his jurisdiction. That's a very serious accusation, he said, accepting the USB drive. We'll need you to come to the station to make a formal statement. Of course, but first, I want to offer Mr. Berg a choice. Juana turned to face her father directly, her expression unreadable. You can do this the hard way. Forced arrest, public trial, maximum sentences for everything we can prove, your business destroyed, your reputation ruined. Your remaining years spent in a Mexican prison with the very people you've spent your life looking down on. Luca closed his eyes, understanding that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse either way. Or, Juana continued, her voice softening slightly, you can do something my mother would have called redemption. What do you mean? Detective Morales asked, clearly interested in any solution that would make his job easier. Full confession, Juana said. Complete cooperation with the investigation. Every contact, every payment, every detail of the operation. In exchange, I'll recommend leniency and work with prosecutors to arrange a plea deal. And, Luca asked quietly, sensing there was more, and you liquidate everything. The business, the houses, the cars, the offshore accounts, everything. The money goes to establish a foundation for single mothers and their children. Mexican women who find themselves abandoned and pregnant, who need the kind of support you never provided. The magnitude of what she was proposing hit everyone in the driveway like a physical force. She wasn't just offering him a reduced sentence. She was offering him a chance to transform his crimes into something that might actually help people. You would trust me to do that? Luca asked, struggling to his feet with movements that made him look decades older than his 55 years. I wouldn't trust you to do anything, Juana replied bluntly. The foundation would be managed by people I choose, with oversight from the Mexican government. Your job would be to confess, cooperate, and then spend whatever time you have left trying to understand what it means to take responsibility for your actions. Detective Morales was taking notes furiously, clearly recognizing that this was the kind of cooperation that could take down an entire network of criminal activity. This is highly irregular, but if he's willing to provide information about cartel operations, I am, Luca said quickly. I'll tell you everything, names, accounts, shipping routes, all of it. But Juana wasn't finished. There's one more condition. She reached into her jacket again and pulled out a photograph, old and creased, showing a young Isabella Montemayor holding a baby. Her mother had been 20 when it was taken, barely more than a child herself, but her eyes held the determined love of a woman who would sacrifice everything for her daughter. You're going to learn about the woman you abandoned, Juana said, offering him the photograph. Every story, every struggle, every moment of joy and pain that made up the 33 years of life you missed. You're going to understand exactly what your choice cost, not just in abstract terms, but in human ones. Luca took the photograph with trembling hands. Staring at the face of the woman he'd loved and abandoned, Isabella looked so young, so full of hope, despite everything she'd been through. The baby in her arms, his daughter, was maybe 6 months old, chubby and serious-eyed. She named me Juana Isabella, his daughter continued. Isabella for her. Juana because it means God is gracious, and she wanted to believe that grace was still possible, even in the worst circumstances. The irony of it wasn't lost on anyone. Isabella had named her daughter after the concept of divine grace, and now that daughter was offering the man who'd abandoned them both a chance at redemption. Why? Luca asked, his voice broken. After everything I've done, everything I've cost you both, why would you offer me this? Juana was quiet for a long moment, looking up at the sky where the last of the storm clouds were dissipating. When she spoke, her voice carried her mother's gentle strength. Because she asked me to, she said simply. In that letter, she asked me to give you a chance to be the man she believed you could become, because carrying hatred for 33 years would make me just as much a prisoner as you've been. She paused, then added with devastating honesty, and because I want to see if it's possible for people to really change, or if we're all just trapped by the worst things we've ever done. Detective Morales cleared his throat. If we're going to do this, we need to do it officially. Mr. Berg, you're under arrest for money laundering and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. As the detective read Luca his rights, Juana found herself thinking about her mother's final words in the hospital. Misha, Isabella had whispered, don't let anger make you smaller than you are. You have the choice to be better than the people who hurt us. Standing in the driveway of her father's mansion, watching him being handcuffed while he clutched the photograph of the woman he'd loved and lost, Juana realized she was about to find out if her mother had been right about the power of second chances. One more thing, she called out as Detective Morales led Luca toward the police car. When you get out of prison, however long that takes, I want you to visit my mother's grave. I want you to tell her yourself what kind of man you chose to become." Luca nodded, unable to speak through the tears that were streaming down his face. As the police car pulled away, carrying him toward the first honest reckoning of his adult life, Juana stood alone in the driveway and wondered if forgiveness was something that happened all at once or if it was a choice you had to keep making, day after day, until it finally felt real. Mexico City, September 2024. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of the Isabella Montemayor Foundation for Single Mothers, where children's laughter mixed with the sound of sewing machines and the gentle hum of women learning new skills. Juana stood at the window of her office on the second floor, watching a group of toddlers play in the garden while their mothers attended a computer literacy class in the building next door. 3 years had transformed this place from an abandoned warehouse in Doctores into something that would have made her mother proud. A sanctuary where women who found themselves alone and pregnant could find not just financial support, but education, job training, and most importantly, hope. The foundation now helped over 200 families monthly, offering everything from prenatal care to university scholarships for the children of single mothers. The irony that it was funded entirely by money that had once been used to exploit Mexico wasn't lost on Juana, but she'd come to see it as a kind of cosmic justice. Blood money transformed into genuine help for the people who needed it most. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Detective Morales. "He's being released today. Thought you should know." Juana set the phone down and took a deep breath. 3 years of prison had passed more quickly than she'd expected, though she knew they must have felt like decades to Luca. True to his word, he'd cooperated fully with the investigation, providing information that had led to the arrest of dozens of people involved in the money laundering network. His testimony had been crucial in dismantling operations that stretched from Mexico to Amsterdam to the Cayman Islands. The plea deal had resulted in a 5-year sentence, reduced to 3 with good behavior and continued cooperation. Juana had visited him exactly once during that time, not out of filial duty, but to ensure he understood the scope of what the foundation was accomplishing with his former wealth. A knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Maria, the former housekeeper who now served as the foundation's administrative coordinator, entered with a folder of papers and a worried expression. "The monthly reports," she said, setting the folder on Juana's desk. "But there's something else. There's a man downstairs asking to speak with you. He says he's your father." Juana nodded, having expected this moment for weeks. "Send him up, please, and Maria, thank you for everything you've done here. I know this isn't the job you expected when you started working for wealthy families." Maria smiled, the worried lines around her eyes softening. "This is the first job I've ever had where I go home feeling proud of what I've accomplished. Your mother would be amazed by what you've built here." 20 minutes later, Juana heard hesitant footsteps on the stairs, followed by a gentle knock on her open door. She looked up from her paperwork to see a man who was barely recognizable as the arrogant businessman who'd humiliated her 3 years ago. Luca van der Berg had aged dramatically. His hair was completely gray now, his face lined with the kind of deep creases that came from serious reflection rather than just time. He'd lost weight, and his clothes, simple jeans and a button-down shirt, were a far cry from the expensive suits he'd once worn like armor. But it was his eyes that showed the most dramatic change. Where once there had been cold calculation and casual cruelty, now there was something that looked almost like peace, tempered by deep sadness and what might have been wisdom. "Hello, Juana," he said quietly, standing in the doorway as if afraid to enter without permission. "Hello, Luca." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Please, sit down." He moved carefully, like someone who'd learned not to take up more space than was offered. "I wasn't sure you'd agree to see me." "I wasn't sure either until this morning." Juana studied his face, looking for signs of the man who'd once called her "you people" with such casual disdain. "You look different. Prison changes you," he said simply. "Or maybe it just strips away all the things you used to hide from yourself. I had a lot of time to think about who I really was, underneath all the money and arrogance. And what did you discover?" Luca was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving around the office, taking in the photographs of families the foundation had helped, the certificates of appreciation from community organizations, the simple but functional furniture that spoke of resources being used wisely rather than ostentatiously. "I discovered that I was a coward," he said finally, "not just in Amsterdam with your mother, but every day since then. I built an entire life around avoiding responsibility, avoiding consequences, avoiding the kind of honest reckoning that might have made me into someone worth knowing. Through the window, they could both see the children playing in the courtyard below, some as young as Isabella had been when she'd been forced to raise Juana alone. The warden told me about this place, Luca continued. About what you've accomplished here. He said it was one of the most successful rehabilitation programs he'd ever seen, even though it wasn't technically a rehabilitation program at all. What did he mean by that? He meant that watching what you built with my money, seeing the good that came from something so ugly, it changed how I thought about everything, about the possibility of redemption, about whether people can really become different than they were. Juana leaned back in her chair, still studying this man who shared her DNA but had been a stranger for most of her life. And what conclusion did you reach? That change is possible, but only if you're willing to do the work every single day. Only if you're willing to face the worst things about yourself and choose to be different. Not just once, but over and over again. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. I wrote letters, he said, placing it on her desk. One every week for 3 years, letters to your mother, telling her about the man I was trying to become. The prison chaplain said it might help with the guilt, but mostly it helped me understand what I'd lost when I lost her. Juana picked up the notebook, feeling its weight. 3 years of weekly letters meant over 150 entries, a dialogue with a dead woman who'd forgiven him before he'd ever asked for forgiveness. She forgave you a long time ago, Juana said softly. The question is whether you've forgiven yourself. I don't know if that's something I should do, Luca replied honestly. Maybe some things are too big for self-forgiveness. Maybe the best I can do is try to live the rest of my life in a way that honors what she meant to me, what you both mean to me. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the sound of children's voices from the courtyard below. Finally, Juana spoke. There's something I need to tell you, she said. Something I've been thinking about for 3 years. Luca looked up, his expression attentive but cautious. I forgive you, she said simply. Not because you deserve it, and not because it erases what happened, but because my mother was right. Carrying anger for your entire life is its own kind of prison, and I don't want to live in that cell anymore. The words hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of 33 years of abandonment and 3 years of careful, deliberate healing. Does that mean? Luca began, then stopped, as if afraid to voice the hope in his question. It means we start from here, Juana said firmly. Not as if the past didn't happen, but as if the future might be different. It means that if you want to be part of my life, really part of it, not just showing up when it's convenient, then we figure out what that looks like. Luca nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'd like that very much. Good, Juana said, standing up from her desk. Then let's start with a visit to my mother's grave. It's time you finally met the woman who saved us both. The cemetery in Xochimilco was quiet in the late afternoon, with golden sunlight filtering through ancient cypress trees and casting long shadows across weathered headstones. Juana walked slowly down the gravel path, carrying a bouquet of white lilies, her mother's favorite flowers, while Luca followed a few steps behind, his hands trembling slightly as he carried his own offering, a small bouquet of tulips from Amsterdam that he'd somehow managed to find in Mexico City. They hadn't spoken much during the drive from the foundation, both lost in their own thoughts about this moment that had been 3 years in the making. For Juana, visiting her mother's grave had become a monthly ritual, a time to share news about the foundation and feel connected to the woman who'd shaped every important decision of her life. For Luca, this would be the first time he'd stood before Isabella's grave, the first time he'd confronted the physical reality of her death. It's just ahead, Juana said softly, pointing toward a modest headstone beneath a flowering jacaranda tree. She always loved this spot, said it reminded her of the park where we used to have picnics when I was little. Isabella Montemayor's grave was simple but well-tended, surrounded by small flowering plants that Juana maintained throughout the year. The headstone bore her mother's name, the dates of her too short life, and an inscription in Spanish, "Beloved mother and teacher. She showed us that love multiplies when it's shared." Luca stopped several feet away, as if afraid to come closer. His face had gone pale, and Juana could see his chest rising and falling with rapid, shallow breaths. "She's really gone," he whispered, and the words sounded like they were being torn from somewhere deep inside him. "She's been gone for 6 years," Juana replied gently. "But in some ways, she's more present in my life now than she ever was. Everything I do with the foundation, every choice I make about how to treat people, she's part of all of it." Luca took a hesitant step forward, then another, until he was standing beside Juana at the foot of the grave. He knelt slowly, placing the tulips against the headstone with hands that shook with emotion. "I'm sorry," he whispered in Spanish, then switched to Dutch, the language of their shared past. "Isabella, I'm so sorry for all of it, for being too young and stupid and scared to choose you, for the years you struggled alone, for never knowing what an incredible daughter we created together." Juana watched her father break down completely, his shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from 36 years of suppressed grief and guilt. She'd imagined this moment countless times over the past 3 years, but the reality was both more painful and more healing than she'd expected. "Tell her about the foundation," Juana said softly. "Tell her what we've built together." Through his tears, Luca began to speak, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. He told Isabella about the warehouse that had been transformed into a sanctuary, about the women who found hope there when they thought all hope was lost. He described the children who played in the courtyard, the computer classes and job training programs, the scholarship fund that would send deserving students to university. "Your money, our money now, I suppose, it's helping hundreds of families," he said to the headstone. "Women who found themselves in the same situation you were in, alone and pregnant and scared. They don't have to face it alone the way you did." As he spoke, Juana found herself seeing her father clearly for perhaps the first time. Not the arrogant businessman who'd humiliated her, not the coward who'd abandoned her mother, but a broken man who'd spent decades running from the consequences of his choices and was finally ready to face them. "There's something else," Luca continued, his voice stronger now. "Something I need you to know about our daughter." He looked up at Juana, his eyes bright with tears and something that might have been pride. "She's extraordinary, Isabella. She's everything we could have hoped for and more. She's intelligent and brave and compassionate in ways that put me to shame. She spent 3 years planning the most elaborate confrontation in history, and when she finally had me at her mercy, she chose forgiveness over revenge. She chose to build something beautiful instead of just tearing down something ugly." The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded Juana of the sunset she and her mother had watched from their tiny apartment balcony on the last good day before the cancer became too much to bear. "I know I don't deserve a second chance," Luca continued, speaking to both Isabella and Juana. "I know I can't undo the damage I caused or give back the years I stole from both of you. But I want to try to be the man you believed I could become, Isabella. I want to be the father our daughter deserved to have all along." Juana knelt beside him, placing her own lilies next to his tulips. "She would have liked knowing that we found each other," she said quietly. "Even like this, even after everything that happened. She always believed in the possibility of redemption." They knelt together in comfortable silence for several minutes, father and daughter united in their love for the woman who'd connected them across decades of separation and pain. The cemetery around them was peaceful, filled with the soft sounds of evening, birds settling into their roosts, the distant hum of traffic, the whisper of wind through leaves. "What happens now?" Luca asked finally. "Between us. I mean, how do we build a relationship when we're essentially strangers who happen to share DNA?" Juana considered the question carefully. It was something she'd been thinking about for months, ever since she'd made the decision to offer him a second chance. "Slowly," she said, "carefully, without any expectations about what it should look like or how quickly it should happen. We start by getting to know each other as we are now, not as the people we might have been if things had been different." She stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. "I'd like you to come to the foundation once a week, not to work. You're not ready for that yet, and the women there deserve better than to be someone's rehabilitation project, but to observe, to understand what we're doing and why it matters. And after that, we'll see. Maybe you'll find ways to help that don't involve your money or your guilt. Maybe you'll discover talents you never knew you had. Maybe you'll just learn to be present in a way you never were before." As they walked back toward the cemetery entrance, Luca stopped suddenly and turned to face his daughter. "Can I ask you something?" he said, Something I've been wondering about for 3 years. What would you have done if I'd refused your offer that day? If I'd chosen the hard way? The trial? The maximum sentence? All of it? Juana smiled. And for the first time since they'd met, it was a smile without any trace of anger or calculation. I would have let you destroy yourself, she said simply, because that would have been your choice to make. But I'm glad you chose differently. They reached the car, just as the first stars were becoming visible in the darkening sky. As Luca opened the passenger door, he paused and looked back toward Isabella's grave, barely visible now in the gathering dusk. Thank you, he called out softly, for everything, for our daughter, for the forgiveness I didn't deserve, for showing me that love really can multiply when it's shared. Then he got into the car beside Juana, and together they drove back toward the city, toward the foundation where wounded families found healing, toward a future that neither of them could have imagined, but both of them were ready to help create. In the distance, the lights of Mexico City sparkled like earthbound stars, full of promise and possibility and second chances.